Welcome back to my channel. I'm Brenda and this is Reading by My Shelf. Today I wanted to do the Stephen King book tag. I found this book tag on Bandy's Books YouTube channel. I thought that I absolutely had to do it. I'm just a huge fan of Stephen King. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first question is, how did you get into Stephen King? Well, this is an easy answer because it was my mom. My mom has always been and is still a huge Stephen King fan. I can remember when I was a kid growing up, anytime a new Stephen King book would come out, she would run out to the library and try to reserve it, or even older books that I would see her, rereading time and time again. She still to this day follows Stephen King and tries to read most of his new releases. I think that this year for Christmas I actually bought her the newest one, which was Holly, I believe. So yeah, it was my mom. The next question is, what was the first Stephen King book that you read? And I can't remember if it was one of two, and I can't remember which one was the first one, but it was either The Talisman, which he wrote with Peter Straub. And in this novel, it's about a boy named Jack who his mother, his sole parent and caretaker, gets very sick. I believe it's with cancer. And so he goes on this journey to try and save her life. But he apparently is able to walk between worlds. And in this other world, he comes across all these bizarre other people and beings, and it is magical and a wild ride. I really love this book and actually would love to do a rereading of this at some point. So, yes, The Talisman, or it was The Dark Half. The Dark Half is about an author who starts having visions, if I remember correctly, or hallucinations or something of that sort as he's writing, and he starts missing these periods of time. And this one I remember being pretty dark and disturbing, which is not hard to believe, as you know, Stephen King certainly falls into that category often. But I do remember really liking this book, and this is another one that I would like to reread soon because it has been a long time since I read it. The next question is, have you read a Stephen King book from the year you were born? And I can say that I actually have not read a Stephen King book from the year I was born. Yeah, I checked. I didn't. The next question is, do you prefer collecting his books in paperback or hardback? And honestly, I don't have a preference. I will buy either. If it's a new release, obviously it's going to be in hardback, and I'm fine with that. I do prefer usually to read trade paperbacks. I just find them easier to hold, easier to read, and I just like the feel of them better than hardbacks. But it's not that big of a deal to me. I'll kind of take whatever's available. The next question is, how many of his books are on your bookshelves? I believe that I have 38 physical books, and I could be wrong because I have some scattered, but I do also have at least one on Kindle. That would be Pet Cemetery. The next question is, known for his long and gory books, which of his novels was tough for you to read? And I would say that none of his novels were tough for me to read because of the gore. That doesn't particularly bother me. I would say that some were tough for me to read simply because of the Stephen King slog, and I'm sure that most of you are familiar with what I mean. Stephen King can be long-winded at times, which is both a benefit to his writing and also a detriment, because while he's able to really write character-driven stories and do in-depth character development and setting development, and even to grow and instill a sense of fear, he also at times takes it too far and just adds information that's irrelevant or boring and kind of loses me. I would say that I kind of expect that to happen at some point in most of his books. And in most of them, I do push through and carry on and end up loving the story anyway. But, there have been times, and I will talk about that in a later question, when it has made me put the book down. The next question is, have you DNF'd any of his books? And the answer is yes. I DNF'd Desperation. As you can see, it's a huge book, and I think I made it about halfway. Yeah, you can see my little mark in there. And I don't know, it just wasn't doing it for me. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it's just one of his books that just doesn't work for me. Either way, I put this down and I have yet to pick it back up. The next question is, have you read them in publication order? And I would say that is an obvious no. And I don't think that's something I would ever attempt to do. I think that I am such a mood reader that I really just pick up books as they appeal to me, and trying to read the long, long backlist of Stephen King books in publication order would just never work. I would quit before I even got started. Next question is, what are Stephen King's books that you haven't read yet but that you would like to read? And I actually have 3 that kind of came to mind top priority over some of the others. And that would be Revival. And all I really know about this is that there is a preacher that comes to town and dreadful things start to happen. Yeah, the young Reverend Charles Jacobs and his beautiful wife brought new life to the local church and captivated their congregation. But with Jamie, he shares a secret obsession, a draw so powerful it would have profound consequences 5 decades after the shattering tragedy that turned the preacher against God, long after his final, scathing sermon. Now Jamie, a nomadic rock guitarist hooked on heroin, meets Charles Jacobs again, and when their bond becomes a pact beyond even the devil's devising, Jamie discovers that revival has many meanings. So I don't know if you've watched any of my other videos, but when I talk about fantasy, often I love when religion is talked about. And so seeing as how this deals with religion and God and a priest, I thought this would probably be a good one for me to pick up. The next one is Misery. I know. I know. I can't believe you haven't read Misery. Well, I haven't. And that's probably because I watched the movie. And as I've mentioned before, that I'm not a huge fan of watching the show or the movie first and then reading the book. It usually kind of spoils the book for me. And I just, because I know what's going to happen, I don't necessarily want to pick it up. But knowing Stephen King and knowing his movies and his shows, I'm sure that there are things in here that were not in the movie or were done differently. And so I would probably take more away from the book than the movie. And it's been a long time since I've actually watched the movie. So, Misery. And the last one I wanted to mention, and I've mentioned this in my TBR, I believe, but that is Night Shift. And this is a collection of short stories. So I mentioned that I had discussed with Josh from Red Fury Books Stephen King's short stories, and how his short stories are where he really believes that Stephen King shines. And unfortunately, I think I've only read like 1 or 2 of his short stories in my life. And Josh said that this collection in particular really stood out to him as being one of the best. So this is on my TBR for this month. Even if I only read 1 story out of it or 2, I'll be happy with that as a start anyway. The next question is, name a book that he wrote that other people liked but you didn't. And I I couldn't think of one for this because I really feel like I have liked almost every book of his that other people have liked. Like I said, the only one that I've started and didn't finish was Desperation, and I've really never heard anyone talk about that. So I don't really know if that's been liked by many or not. Did you read Desperation? Did you like it? Should I pick it back up? The next question is, name a book that he wrote that you think is underrated? And for that, I'm going to say The Outsider, because while one of my favorite books of Stephen King's is 11/22/63, which obviously ventures outside of the horror genre and is one of his standout books in my opinion, I do hear many people saying how much they love that book. And so this one came to mind because I really feel like I don't hear people talking about this book that much. And I remember really enjoying it. And I believe they even made a series out of it. So this is about a man. I'm trying to remember. I believe it's kind of like Tale of the Body Snatchers, in which these crimes start happening, but the DNA is from a local man who's kind of like a high school football coach and teacher, and he's like well respected in his community. And come to find out, there is this person that has this ability to shapeshift into other people's identities. I remember this as being pretty bizarre and freakish, disturbing even, but I thought it was really good. One of his better, more recent books. The next question is, which of Stephen King's characters would you like to have dinner with? And for that, I have two. The first one is the boy Jack from The Talisman, because I would love to hear his firsthand account of these adventures now, years after. And, I believe there is, and actually I have it, yes. Okay. I believe there is a sequel to this. It's called Black House. And so maybe instead of having dinner with him, I should read the sequel. But I also wanted to mention Charlie from Fairy Tale. If you see a trend here, it's because I thoroughly enjoy stories in which the characters travel to different worlds or kind of alternate dimensions, alternate realities, things of that nature. And that's kind of what this book does too. This is one of his newer releases, and Charlie is a young kid who ends up caretaking for this older gentleman in his neighborhood, and he finds out after he passes that the gentleman has a portal in his yard to another world, and he has kept it locked up and protected for many, many years. But then, when he passes, hell breaks loose, and Charlie's put in a position where he kind of has to go all in and dive down into the well and save the day. And I thought that this was a really great character exploration on Charlie. It's kind of a coming of age story. It deals with grief, and it also, of course, is a little bit whimsical, and it incorporates a lot of your classical fairy tale elements, but in a Stephen King kind of way. So this was a good one. Should pick this one up. The next question is, did Stephen King inspire you to start reading or writing? And I would say no, although I do feel inspired by his ability to write so many chonkers of a book, and his insatiable, I mean, this man pumps out so many books. It's almost unbelievable. I mean, he's in his 70s now, and he's still knocking out like what, one a year. He is truly the king. The next question is, if you were to meet Stephen King, what would you ask him? And I would ask him, what scares you? Not only that, but what is your favorite villain that you've ever written? I think that those two questions, because the ideas that he comes up with, it really makes me wonder what goes on in his mind and if anything scares him. The next question is, have you ever been to Bangor, Maine? And that is a big fat no. I would love to go, but I have not been. The next question is, do you prefer his books or his movies? And I would certainly say, and would probably always say in every situation, that I generally prefer the books to the movies. There is something to be said for the fact that your imagination is more capable of filling in the blanks and scaring you more so than any producer, director, filmographer could produce. I just think that that element of the things lurking in the back of your mind, and everybody has their own everybody has their own idea of what's scary. And while Stephen King may give you the basics, the fundamentals of what is scary in his books, there is still the need for you to fill in some blanks. And to me, that will always be scarier than watching somebody else's idea on a TV screen. The next question is, what is your favorite Stephen King movie? And this is an easy answer. And actually, I have two because one is a movie and one is a show. My favorite Stephen King movie is Pet Sematary. I have read the book and it was very scary. And the movie to me was so well done. And I'm talking about the first movie, the original Pet Sematary. I have not watched the remake yet, so I cannot comment on that. But I just remember in particular seeing the sister, Zelda, and that scared the living crap out of me. The way she was just so sinister looking and just malignant. And I was just scared that she was gonna come up and just grab me. And I don't know, she scared me. She did it for me. It wasn't the little boy, it wasn't the cat, it wasn't that any of that. It was Zelda, hands down. But the show, because as you I'm sure are aware, Stephen King's books have been turned into series, and the one that I loved was It. I loved in particular, way that they did the past and the present timelines. I love the actors that they used. I thought that Tim Curry as the clown, as Pennywise, was just fantastic. And I would like to say that Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise was phenomenal as well. I did really enjoy the newer version. I just remember being a kid watching the episodes of It with my parents and loving it and tormenting my brother because he's terrified of clowns. The next question is, what is the most recent book you've read by Stephen King? And that is Fairy Tale. So this book was published in 2022. I bought it, pre-ordered it, and read it as soon as I got my hands on it, and I loved it. It was great. You should read it. The very last question says to tag some people. And so for this, I'm going to name Talking Story, Fantasy Awash, The Mild Rumpus, and Bibliotheory. So I would love to hear your thoughts and chat with you more about any of these books down in the comments, or if you think that there are any of his books that I should really get to sooner than the others because they are just fantastic, please mention them as well. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe to see more. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. See you again soon.
What was the first Stephen King book that you wrote? And even the devil's devising.